Thank you very much for your stories with you tonight. I actually have a video that's going to tell you a little bit more about me.
She blinded me with science.
See that lady at the front of the room? She looks like a regular person, but she's not. She's an author who's escaped from her home office near Edmonton, where she should be writing another book.
Science!
But now she's found something even more fun to do. Share stories and talk books with nice folks like you.
Science!
This author's name is Joan Marie Galat. Galat rhymes with dot, which is handy, because she wrote the Dot to Dot in the Sky series.
Science.
This 6-book series tells you what you can see in the night sky. You'll discover ancient myths, stories with heroes and adventure. Ms. Galat loves outer space.
Science.
She hasn't been able to escape gravity, but she has imagined what would happen if a lab rat set out to prove his species should be the one to colonize Mars. Follow his adventures in Mortimer, Rat Race to Space. And if you wonder about exploding stars or what might happen if you get too close to a black hole, Ms. Galat just might give you the answer. Canadian astronauts like Roberta Bondar and Chris Hadfield have said nice things about her books. You can find out what they think by reading the back covers. Ms. Galat's books have won a nice pile of awards, and some have been translated into another language. She has also written magazine articles, radio commercials, an internet cartoon, and speeches for other people. Ms. Galat is obsessed with writing, research, and yes, even editing. When she's not fixing her own writing, she's fixing someone else's. Stand clear! The woman has a red pen! Be sure to check out Joan's National Geographic titles, like Solve This, Wild and Wacky Challenges for the Genius Engineer in You, and other books that explore our world like Too Much Trash, How Litter is Hurting Animals, and Make Your Mark, Make a Difference, a kid's guide to standing up for people, animals, and the planet. Who knows what she'll write about next? Maybe she'll tell you at question time at the end of her talk.
She blinded me with science. She blinded me with...
Let's get started. Please welcome Joan Marie Galat.
Thank you very much. When you're a writer, you can write your own introduction, so it's kind of handy. Some of my pictures aren't loading, but I think we'll be okay. There's the Milky Way on when you can't see it. I don't know, some of the pictures aren't loading, but on a clear day from a high point of land, you can see about 200 kilometers into the distance. On a clear night, you can see stars and other objects in the night sky up to several thousand light years away. Our environment extends upward into the night sky, and the nature of night includes the stars, the planets, and the moon. It includes the northern lights, meteors, and our galaxy, the Milky Way. It includes the nocturnal animals, but it doesn't stop there. The night supports the diurnal animals who, active in the day, must now sleep, and it must include us. We'll see if this. Yeah, that looks like it's okay now. Thanks. So gazing up at the night sky sparks two conflicting feelings. The world is immense, and I am not. These feelings about the night sky are meaningful. They make us think about our place within the larger environment. And I thought about this a lot after my first trip to New Zealand in 2013. When I looked to the north, all the star patterns that I recognized were upside down. On the left is my view of Orion from home, and on the right, your view of Orion, how it looks here. So it was kind of unsettling. I don't know what's going on. Some of my pictures aren't working, but do you think we should just pause for a second and maybe see what we should do there?
See if I can fix it. You keep talking.
Let's see. I think maybe we'll just, yeah. Because most of this will be better with the pictures.
Of course.
Okay.
Actually,
See, they're showing.
yeah, no, with the map though.
Mm.
You've got a backup memory stick, haven't you?
I do. Shall I grab it?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, we'll just pause for a second. That's right here, actually.
I did say there was a problem when it was copying the first time, didn't it? I jinxed it by saying all the technical stuff was working. Alright, we get the that one?
Yeah, the Auckland one. I do have my backup plan if needed.
That looks a lot.
That looks better. All right, so we did that. So I'll see. Let's go presenter review. Let's see.
There we go.
There we go. All right. So there. All right. Sorry about that. All right. So let me just get this formatted so I can see it. There we go. All right. So when we think of the environment, we typically think of landscapes, or people generally do. And where I live in Canada, that means the snow-capped Rocky Mountains, the Badlands where dinosaur bones are found, and great big fields of canola. But our environment does not stop where the land ends, and it's not just what we see in the nighttime. So I've already said this part, so I'm going to keep going. Okay, so I've gone there. Okay, so I was talking about Orion. Here's another portrayal. So the first time I looked up here in the southern hemisphere, it felt odd to me. My environment had been rearranged. And when I looked in other directions, the sky was completely unfamiliar, and it made me think about how stories have settings and about how we're tied to our settings physically and emotionally. When I look into the night sky, its constellations, its planets, and the aurora, I feel a connection. And no matter how little I can see around me, I can look up and I can find something familiar. But when I realized how much the night sky was part of my personal environment, I wondered, do other people who look up feel the same way? How do people who never look up connect with the night environment? How unfair is it that many people cannot see a dark sky and experience that connection? These are the stars I see from my backyard, and this gives you an idea of why my series is called Dot to Dot in the Sky. I wrote the Dot to Dot in the Sky series because when I was a young girl, I went out into a field and I looked up at the night sky, and I had a children's book called The How and Why Book of Space, and I was trying to find the constellations, and I was really hung up on counting stars. And if I saw a picture in the book and the constellation had 9 stars, but I can only see 7, I thought maybe that's not it. And when you really start looking at the stars and you turn your head different ways, you can start to see these shapes all over the place if you really try. And so I didn't really learn the constellations until I was an adult. And then when I had my kids, I wanted to teach them about the stars. I wanted to show them the constellations in the night sky. And I went shopping for a book that partnered how to find the constellations with the myths that early peoples and ancient cultures told about the night sky. And I couldn't find that book. I was already working on, I was writing, I was trying to be a published author, and I was submitting things to publishers, but I hadn't sold an idea yet. And I pitched this book to a publisher, and this is the one that they said yes to. So that's how I got started. The first book, Stories in the Stars, came out in 2001. It's not up there, actually. So, and I included this book here, Make Your Mark, Make a Difference, because it's brand new. It came out in February this year, and it includes a full chapter on space-related issues, including dark skies. So partnering stories with science allowed me to reveal the human connection between the earth and the sky. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this. Raise your hand if you've ever seen a real bear. All right, raise your hand if you've seen a picture of a bear. It's a trick question. All right, raise your hand if you think the person near you sleeps with a teddy bear. Anybody? Yeah. All right, so everybody knows something about bears. You know bears don't have long tails dragging behind them, but the bears in the sky, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, have a lot longer tails than the bears that we see on Earth. And the Greeks tell a story about this. They tell a story about Zeus, the king of all the gods. He liked a lady named Callisto who lived in the mountains and liked to hunt. But Zeus had a wife named Hera, and she didn't like her husband talking to other pretty ladies, so she used her special powers, and she turned Callisto into a bear. Now, when Callisto walked through the forest, she looked like a wild animal, but she thought like a human. She was afraid of wild animals, and she was also afraid of hunters. One day, her son Arcas was out hunting. He saw the bear, and he didn't know it was his own mother, so he lifted up his spear to kill the bear. But just in time, Zeus looked down from Mount Olympus. He saw what was happening, and he saved Callisto by turning Arcas into a bear as well. Then he reached down, he grabbed the tails of the two bears, he decided to lift them up into the sky where they would turn to stars and become immortal. But the bears were heavy. He really had to pull to lift them up into the sky, and he pulled so hard, their tails stretched. It's obvious when you think about it. When Hera saw the bears in the sky, she became angry and jealous all over again. She didn't think the bears deserved to be placed in the sky as stars. That was a special honor. It meant you were important. And she didn't think they were very important. So she did what we often do on Earth. She complained to her friends. She complained to her friends who ruled the ocean. And Oceanus and Tethys felt sorry for Hera. They agreed to stop the bears from traveling so they would never set below the horizon and never go into the sea. And I love it when these ancient stories explain something that is actually true. You know, they noticed that these were circumpolar for the Greeks and for where I live. They could see them all year round. So their story explains those facts, which I think is wonderful. An indigenous group in Canada called the Micmac have a different story about the same constellation. The bowl of the Dipper, in this case, is the bear, but the other three stars are the hunters, and the second star from the end, where there's actually two stars, is a hunter carrying a pot. He wants to cook some bear meat. So in this story, after a winter of sleep, the bear wakes up and crawls out of his den in Corona Borealis, the northern crown. The warriors hunt the bear all spring and throughout the summer. They follow the bear across the northern horizon, where they finally catch up and kill the bear. The bear's skeleton stays in the sky until spring, but his spirit returns to the den. And every spring, a new bear returns to be chased by the hunters. So in Canada, we have a lot of maple trees. The maple leaves turn red every fall, and so that's how they explained that aspect of nature. So in case you find yourself in my neck of the woods, there's a trick to find the North Star. Some of you might know this trick, but if you know your latitude above the equator, you can make a fist, put your fist straight out in front of you. So do that with me now, make your fist. Look tough. And we're going to go, if you were at my house, we'd go 10, 20, 30, 40 sideways fists for about 55. And you have to be facing north, by the way. And look up your arm into that patch of the night sky, and just like that, you find the North Star. And it's just the handiest little trick. If you're in Mexico, you might only go up to about 35. Depends where you are. So you can always find the North Star, and in the Northern Hemisphere, that's a great jumping point to find some of these pictures in the sky. So if we jump to a nearby constellation, we jump to Taurus. There's another story about Zeus, and in this story, Zeus cloaked the earth in a cloud so that he could visit a princess, Princess Io, without his wife Hera noticing. But Hera saw the cloud, she became suspicious, and she landed on Earth next to Zeus, and she said, "What are you doing?" And he saw her coming, though, so he had quickly turned Princess Io into a bull. Hera looked at that bull, and she said, "Would you give me that bull for a gift?" And obviously Zeus didn't want to, but he knew he was in trouble, so he let her lead poor Princess Io away. Hera asked a giant with 100 eyes to guard the princess. With 100 eyes, the giant could always be awake. Some eyes could sleep, but other eyes would stay awake, and Princess Io did not have any hope of getting away. Zeus felt terrible, he sent Hermes, the messenger god, represented by the planet Mercury, to go and try and solve this problem for him. So Hermes started playing a flute. He was playing lullabies, trying to get all 100 of those eyes to close, but some of them always stayed open. So finally he approached the giant and he started to tell him long and boring stories. Eventually all 100 eyes closed, and he slayed the beast, and Hera came along. She saw what had happened, and to honor Argus for being so loyal, she rose him up into the sky, where he became the constellation Pavo the Peacock. So there we go, Pavo. Now, the moon is really great because when you're trying to share sky stories with people and people are having trouble finding what you're trying to show them, you can always see the moon. And you can see it anywhere, even in light polluted skies. So without water or weather to change its features, the moon's looks haven't changed for about 3 billion years. And I have a book, Stories of the Moon. When you look up at the moon, you might say you can see the face of the man in the moon. You might say you can see 2 frogs sitting on rocks. You can see a turtle or a princess or a rabbit. Where I live, the rabbit is this way. But I feel like I haven't had a good chance to see the moon here. It's a half moon right now, but isn't it this way here? Yes. So do you see the rabbit? The rabbit ears are up here, the head's here, body there, and the tail there. So I'll tell you a story about the rabbit. And this is also a Mi'kmaq tale, so it's from an indigenous group in eastern Canada this one. And in this story, the rabbit is a hunter. He catches wild game and he shares the food with his grandmother because she's too old to hunt anymore. But as time passes, the rabbit and his grandmother grow hungry. He checks his traps. It looks like he caught something, but there's nothing there. He hops around in large circles and he sees something he's never seen before. He sees long, glowing footprints. He doesn't know what they're from, but he thinks it must be from a thief, so he decides to set a trap to catch the thief. Well, you've probably heard brave as a lion, brave as a tiger, not brave as a bunny. He was afraid, so he picked a night when there was a nice full moon in the sky and the moonlight shone and sparkled across the snow. And he took the rope you see him holding there. He made a great big circle on the ground. He tied a special kind of knot, and he waited behind that tree one night to see if he could catch the thief. He looked out across the land, and he waited and waited. Even though it was a nice bright night, suddenly it became terribly dark. And before the rabbit could look up and see if clouds had covered the sky, he felt something step inside his rope. He pulled his end tight, he tied it fast around the tree, and then he peeked around it to see what he had caught. Whatever it was so bright, it hurt his eyes terribly. He became so frightened, he raced as fast as he could home to his grandmother. He arrived out of breath, and he told her what had happened. Grandmother was wise. She said, "You might have caught the man from the moon. You better go back and let him go right away. This could be bad news for all of us." The rabbit thought about that. He thought, she's probably right, but I don't want to go back. Still, he was respectful and obedient. He said, "Yes, grandmother, but I'll do it tomorrow." She said, "No, you need to go back right now." So the little rabbit started on his way. And along the way, he passed a creek, and along that creek, there was some nice soft mud, and it gave that little rabbit an idea. He reached down, he gathered up a little ball of mud, he hopped back over to the tree, and he squinted into the light, just like I am now. And he threw that mud with all his energy, and there was a great big splat. "Stop throwing mud at me, let me go," shouted the voice. When the rabbit heard that voice, he thought of how hungry he was, how grandmother was suffering. He didn't even answer him. He went back to the creek where the mud was nice and soft, and this time he gathered up an even larger ball of mud, and he brought it back over, and he squinted and threw it into the light, and there was an even louder splat. "Stop throwing mud at me, let me go. I have to be back up in the sky before the sun rises, or I'm doomed forever." Now the rabbit knew he had caught the man from the moon. He said, "I won't let you go. I won't let you go unless you promise never to steal from anyone again. In fact, never to come down to earth again." Just then, streaks of light started to shine in the eastern sky. The sun was about to rise, and the voice said, I promise, just let me go right now." So the little rabbit hopped over, he chewed the rope in half, the moon rose up into the sky. He kept his promise. You might have noticed he never came down to earth again. He never stole from anyone again. And the Mi'kmaq people say, to this day, you can look up and see the dirty face of the man in the moon. And the moon man feels embarrassed. He feels ridiculous that all of us look up to admire that beautiful moon in the sky and we catch him with a dirty face. So once a month, you might have noticed, the moon goes away. He gets smaller and smaller until he disappears. And he's gone to wash his face clean, but he can't get it clean. He always comes back with the same dirty face. So another beautiful Indigenous story that explains something in our world. So the North American Native people kept track of time, as many other cultures around the world did, by observing moon phases. They also noticed that there was one day every spring when sunlight and darkness were of equal lengths. And this day, the spring equinox, became the beginning of the Native calendar. The moon told them when to plant and harvest and hunt. Members of the Algonquin tribe recognized several different names. In September or October, they had the harvest moon. The moon cast so much light that they could gather food at night. October was the hunter's moon because the leaves had fallen and it was time to hunt. And November, right now, would be the beaver moon because the beavers are getting ready for winter. December is the cold moon when the nights are long and dark for us. So I have a lot of fun collecting stories from around the world and discovering how people from long ago connected to our night sky. After I've worked really hard on one of my books, I want to celebrate, and you've probably heard of authors having a book launch. So it's a special kind of party. We might go to a bookstore or library, read from our books, eat cake, sign some books. But I take things literally. I really think about what words mean, and when I hear book launch, I feel like I should launch my books into the sky. And so I have launched 5 books in rockets. The Edmonton Rocketry Club has helped me out with this. I'm holding my largest rockets called the Aurora Borealis because it roared when it went up. So I was able to take the nose cone off, roll up my book, put it inside, put a motor underneath, and go into a big wide open area and send my book into the sky. Luckily, these were soft covers, so I could do that. I'm going to show you a video of me launching the Aurora book. So I'm holding the remote control, and here's the
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Successful launch.
It looks like it's going to hit the building, but it goes behind it. And now you'll see it in slow-mo. So I was pretty happy with that launch. I did have one that crashed during a spring snowstorm. So I got my book back, and I'm going to play a book trailer that's going to tell you a little bit about this book as soon as I find the mouse. Where did it go? See it? There we go.
High in the sky, colored ribbons of light flicker and wave. It's impossible to look up at auroras without wondering, why do they exist? We know the northern and southern lights appear when solar particles enter Earth's magnetic field and collide with gases. But ancient cultures didn't know what was happening. They told stories to explain why the mysterious lights rose and fell across the night. Discover the ancient tales in Dot to Dot in the Sky, Stories of the Aurora by award-winning author Joan Marie Galat. Meet a frost giant, a chief who crosses the Milky Way, and a 7-headed monster. Find out about magnetic storms, solar winds, and the Earth-Sun connection, complete with stunning illustrations, photographs, diagrams, a glossary, and index. Explore how modern science and early peoples explain why the lights exist. Stories of the Aurora brings the wonder of the night sky right into your hands. Visit your local bookstore or joangalat.com for details.
All right, so if it's dark enough to see the Milky Way, it's dark enough to see an aurora. And it's really, I think it's impossible to look up at the northern and southern lights without wondering, why do they exist? Both early peoples and modern science have tried to answer this question. Science tells us that the lights appear when the sun ejects plasma, sending solar winds sailing towards Earth. Particles from the sun collide with the Earth's magnetic field. The particles transfer some of their energy to the atoms and molecules in our upper atmosphere. And as the gas particles release energy in the form of light, beautiful, glowing auroras appear. Each atom or molecule emits a certain color of light. Oxygen causes the most common color, which is green. Oxygen can make the top of the auroras red, and nitrogen can cause red light along the bottom. No two are ever alike, and on rare occasions they can be purple, blue, or a blend of colors. But ancient cultures didn't know about the magnetic fields, the molecules, and the solar winds, and instead they would have looked up at the, long ago, and they would have said, what is going on? And they tried to find answers through stories. They often said, are these northern lights a sign of something good? Or is it an omen of something great? Or is something terrible going to happen? So around the world, people both admired and feared the aurora. They made up stories to explain the mysterious lights. The Inuit saw the lights, some of them saw the lights as animals that were crossing to the upper world. They told stories about the caribou, the salmon, the beluga whale, and the seal, and how they created the northern lights on their way up. Others noted that the auroras appeared at important times, such as the birth or death of a person, and linking events on Earth with the events they observed in the night sky helped long ago people make sense of their world. The auroras triggered art on cave walls and in the form of stories. Okay, whoops, I think I skipped one there. Okay, First Nations in the North told of spirit messengers. They believed some people could call the lights down and make them do things. In Norway, people said you could make the lights dance faster by waving a white cloth. In Denmark, the lights were the wings of flapping geese. They were stuck in the ice. And the North American Klondikers had one that I really liked. They thought that it was a great gold deposit and the light was reflecting up into the night sky. They told stories of spirits, gods, people, and creatures seen high overhead. In one of the stories, they say Inuit children were kicking a walrus skull around in a game that we would call football. But other Inuit said, no, that's not how it happened at all. They said humans were kicking they said walruses were kicking a human skull around, and that's what caused the northern lights. In this story from the Algonquin, or the Wabanaki, the son of Chief Morningstar wore a rainbow belt around his forehead and around his waist. He wouldn't tell his parents what he was doing. He kept disappearing, so Chief Morningstar, which is represented by the planet Venus, followed him to the upper world, and he saw that his son was playing a game like football. And in this case, the ball is a caribou hide covered object. And whenever he kicked the ball, the lights would shine the brightest. He was the best player, but he wasn't supposed to be up there, so he got into trouble. This story is actually in the Moon book, because I didn't know I was going to write a book about the aurora. But it has the characters of the sun and the moon and Luminius, the leader of the Northern Lights. And in this story, the sun wants his son to marry the daughter of the moon. But the moon mother says, no way is my daughter marrying your son. You sun people are no good. You never come home at night. You're gone most of the winter. That's not good enough for my girl. And so the war is on, and the sun twirls and whirls, and he creates terrible storms across the earth, which I think is a great part of the story, because the sun is responsible for all of our weather here on Earth, and that is how it works in the story as well. I'm just going to skip that one, and I had a few that we're not going to skip there. Okay, so I do have, sometimes, this is my backup plan, sometimes you can't see the stars, so I wrote a book about the clouds. And there's all kinds of stories that explain the weather. I'm just going to skip ahead, though. I launched that one under a weather balloon. And there are stories about the night sky that trickled into that book as well, though. This one's called How the Raven Brought the Sun. And this story, a chief had put the sun in a bag and the moon in the bag and all the stars in a different bag, and he was keeping them all to himself. The world was dark. And Raven, who is a trickster in these tales, he learned of this. He wanted to find out if it was true, so he found a way to get into the teepee and release the stars, the sun and the moon, and life was forever changed. We had light, and now we have too much light. So I got interested in the issue of light pollution because I wanted to see the stars, and now, you know, as a young girl, I didn't know that light pollution was interfering with my view of the night sky. And when you look at something like this, you know that you're not going to see the night sky. But the more I learned about the issue of light pollution, the more I learned it's also a problem for our animals. And so I collected a lot of facts, and I decided to write a book on light pollution, which is Dark Matter's Nature's Reaction to Light Pollution. So originally my book was different. I had written a completely nonfiction book, and I sent it to the publisher, Red Deer Press, and the editor was interested. At this time, there were no children's books on this topic. And the editor said, this is very interesting. I think it's important. We should publish a book like this, but I think it needs a narrative. And I said, well, what do you mean? Do you want me to sneak my facts into a novel? And he said, no, why don't you write about your own life? Why don't you write about how you got interested in nature and wildlife and the night sky? And so I said, okay, are you going to offer me a contract? And he said, no, write it first. So that's typical, but I did, and it did get published. So I'm flattered by that because this book is very important. For one thing, it explains, you know, the issue of light pollution and how we can do better, but also it's publishing of ordinary stories. So I think it's really important to recognize that we all have stories that are worth telling, an ordinary life. What I want is readers to, when they read this book, or children read these stories, to say, oh, I didn't know that mattered. I didn't know that meant something. That happened to me too, or I saw something like that. And now I understand that it's tied to light pollution, and that there's something important going on here, so that we should pay attention, you know, to our personal stories. So it was really fun for me to write. I made a list of stories from my life, and I think it's something everyone should do. You might be surprised, and when you're trying to communicate dark sky messages, it's a great way to do that, is to share stories that are tied to the night sky, because people remember stories more than they remember the facts that you share with them. They'll remember how you make them feel. So I launched this book with an owl, not in a rocket, because it's a hardcover, but I was able to have what's called an education owl at my book launch. The Conservation Society had saved this barred owl. His name is Colonel Slade, and he had been hit by a car, probably because he was blinded by the lights. And they were able to save his life, but they were not able to release him in the wild. He became very tame, so I was able to have him at my event. This is not common. We are not all getting to borrow owls in Canada. So that was a great way for me to bring attention to the issue of light pollution. And I'm going to play this book trailer for you. Oops, sorry, a little astronaut went flying.
Well, that's a joke.
Can't see? Afraid of the dark? Worried about burglars? Is all that light really necessary? It seems harmless, but lights from cars, streetlights, houses, and other buildings affect animals, plants, and even humans. Lights can cause birds to strike windows or circle towers until they become so tired they fall. Lights can stop sea turtles from laying eggs and make it hard for bats to reach feeding areas. 13-year-old Joan loves the outdoors, day and night. She encounters the fragile animals impacted by light and shares her journey in Dark Matters, Nature's Reaction to Light Pollution. Along with stories from finding an injured bird to spending the night with a moose, you'll discover unexpected facts on the amazing nightlife of birds, mammals, amphibians, fish, and other animals. See how light contributes to smog and global warming, and how ecosystems and biodiversity are impacted by light, which often is unnecessary. Find out why scientists must be able to observe the night sky, and how you can help reduce light pollution for animals, plants, people, and the planet. Because dark matters. A children's nonfiction and literature title by award-winning author Joan Marie Galat, published by Red Deer Press.
So one of the animals that are impacted are the leatherback turtle. I think there's 7 species of marine turtle and 6 of them are endangered. And one of the reasons is light pollution. Many sea turtles go back to the same beach where they were born. The females go back to lay their eggs. And they climb out of the water, they make their way up the sand, they dig a hole and they drop about 100 eggs, cover it up with sand and go back, and that's it. Their job is done. If everything goes according to plan, all 100 of those baby turtles will erupt on the same night. But sometimes the sea turtles are reluctant to lay their eggs. They go up on shore and they do what's called a false crawl. So here you can see the tracks show that the turtle came straight out, dug a hole, buried the eggs, and went back to the water. But here she's done a false crawl. She's come up on shore and said, no, I don't like it here after all, and gone back into the water. And often this will happen because of light pollution. But if everything goes right, and all 100 of those baby turtles come out on the same night, they have an instinct to go toward shore, and they know where the water is because evolution has taught them that that will be the brightest thing on the horizon. The starlight and the moonlight will be reflecting off the water. But they're not always getting natural conditions. They're getting, they're getting businesses and houses and resorts and lit up piers and things on the shore. So they're often going the wrong way. And if that sea turtle doesn't get to the water by morning, it will not survive. It will either dry up and die, or a predator will get it. Sometimes they walk into campfires, they're drawn to the light, or they might fall into a chlorinated swimming pool and die. So their chances aren't very good. Even one in 1,000 sea turtles don't make it to adulthood because they are prey as well. So lighting on piers is another problem. You might think, oh, well, that'll get the turtles going in the right direction, but the lights attract predatory fish. They're looking for bioluminescent squid. They come to the light thinking that that might be some squid, and they're finding some of those sea turtles that have gone in that direction. So that's a problem. Birds have problems as well. One of the ways they know which way to go during migration is by looking at the position of the stars during the dark night. When light or clouds make stars hard to see, they use the Earth's magnetic field. But that might not work either because artificial light may also interfere with a bird's internal magnetic compass. Lights can cause birds to lose their way, leave their flight paths, and never reach their destinations. Young birds get into the most trouble due to lack of experience. Some stare into the light until they fly into it and strike a structure. Some get trapped in the light and they circle around until they become so exhausted they fall, and they may die on impact or knock themselves out, and a predator may come along. Or they may die or starve because they're too injured to find food. So this is a terribly sad picture. This is one night's worth of birds collected off the streets of Toronto, Canada in one night. It's actually someone's job to go and pick up dead birds every morning. And I just think that's an absolutely terrible thing. It's the same in New York City. Both of these cities are on migration paths, and birds are attracted to the light. Experts think that every year 1 to several million birds die in these cities, and up to 100 million migrating birds may be killed each year from striking lit windows in North America alone. Birds that survive a fall are often too tired to escape predators, and they may not survive migration because they've wasted their fat reserves that they've built up. Sometimes birds get trapped in columns of light. These lights are called the tribute of light. They were put at ground zero, where the World Trade Centers used to stand, to honor the people who were killed and the firefighters and all the other rescue personnel who made sacrifices there. They don't have them on all the time, but when they are on, this is what happens. So we need to find other ways to celebrate besides using lights, to honor people, or using lights in decorating. So I'm going to share something from the book. And just to give you an idea of how the stories support, it's really the weirdest memoir you'll ever find is tied to light pollution. But here's a story related to birds in New York. So my father was from Brooklyn, and we used to go to New York to visit family. And it was always very strange for me to think of how my dad grew up in this big city, because I didn't grow up in a big city. I grew up in a suburb of a city. And When we were there, I wasn't allowed to go outside of the house. I wasn't allowed to sit on the front steps. I wasn't allowed to go to the park at the end of the street. It was not considered safe. So I wondered how he grew up there. And, and I ended up writing this story about a trip that we took there. Finally, we got to leave the house. We take the subway to Manhattan to see the tallest buildings in New York, the World Trade Center. The elevator zooms us up 100 floors, making my stomach feel like it isn't traveling as fast as the rest of my body. We arrive at the observation deck and step outside to see the view of Manhattan, Brooklyn, New Jersey, and the harbor. We're so high up, we look down at the Empire State Building, once the world's tallest structure. I'm thinking this is a lot more fun than hanging around the house when I spot something moving. Turning toward the motion, I see a bird on the flat roof on the other side of the safety barrier. It's trying to fly, but can only stretch out one wing and flutter sideways. The bird has a red forehead and throat, a strong straight beak, black and white wings, and yellow underparts. I recognize this species because it lives in Alberta too. It's a yellow-bellied sapsucker. Dad comes over to see what I'm looking at, and we wonder what a woodpecker is doing up here and how it got injured. Could it have hit one of the glass windows and fallen here? I want to help, but what can I do? It's close to the place where the building drops off 100 stories to the ground. I asked Dad if we should tell someone, but he doesn't think anyone is going to risk his life to save a bird that might not live anyway. I try to change his mind, but he insists, and then it's time to go. Looking back as we line up for the elevator, I feel as helpless as the woodpecker that can't fly. I feel like I'm always telling people really great things are bad, but this is bad. Campfires, fireworks, outdoor laser shows, these are all problems, and more things to feel guilty about, I guess. But we can use light responsibly. This is something where we can all make a difference, and we don't want to feel like this guy here. Light pollution is a problem with solutions. We don't need to shine a light where it's not needed, and people can help animals by turning off the lights. Timers, motion sensors, blinds, and dark curtains help. Choosing lower wattages and planting vegetation helps. Saying no to decorative lighting helps. And lighting has to be used more responsibly both inland and on the coast because the overall glow of the light in the night sky is part of the problem. I know that you all know that. The night sky provides our only view to the universe, and that view is important. Scientists watch for meteorites, asteroids, and comets that could strike Earth. Studying stars helps us understand the sun, and we need to know how the sun behaves. It creates our weather and impacts our lives every day. Solar flares affect communication systems, and the sun and the moon create Earth's tides. The study of other planets helps teach us about Earth and its atmosphere. Stars, which can be used for navigation, must be visible too. Constellations serve as the map of our sky, and they help describe where planets and other celestial objects are located. Scientists must be able to observe the night sky to advance science and ensure our environment remains sustainable and safe. Beyond science, all people deserve to see the heavens without interference from light pollution. The night sky gives us free entertainment. It provides natural art in the form of glimmering aurora, illustrations in the form of constellations, and captivating stories from ancient cultures around the world. Our environment is more than landscapes. It extends upward into the night sky. It is immense, and we are small, yet it is up to us to cherish and protect the nature of night. So, that's my presentation, but I have one more thing I'm just going to tell you about, is my book, Mortimer, Rat Race to Space. I often speak to school groups, and kids will raise their hands and ask me, do you want to go into space? And I started to think about what is it like to live in outer space, and I started to collect facts and research, and again, I wrote a completely nonfiction book, and the editors that read this book asked me to make it into a novel. I did have a character in my nonfiction book. I had a character named Mortimer. He was a lab rat in Houston, and he was observing the astronauts training at NASA. And he was making smart remarks. He had an attitude. He thought, humans are absolutely ridiculous. Rats should be part of a future mission to Mars. And so he decides to scientifically make a case for this. And I had a great time writing this book. I actually traveled to NASA twice. I was able to ask astronauts questions about living in space and hear some of their stories. One of them told about returning to Earth afterwards, and he was so used to being on the space station and floating that when he got back home, he sometimes forgot that he couldn't float. So one night he fell out of bed. And his wife said, like, what's going on over there? And he said, oh, I tried to float to the bathroom. And another of the astronauts told a story about shaving. He was shaving in space. In space, when he was shaving, he would just put his razor in the air. But guess what he did when he got home? He put his razor in the air, and that crashed to the floor. So I was able just to collect all kinds of great stories and information. And so I was true to the science. I didn't plan to write a book in my life about a lab rat, but I wanted to include an animal that had been to space. And at the time that I was collecting my information, the only animals that had been on the space station were lab rats, mice, goldfish, and fruit flies. So rats are clever, and they're survivors, and so they actually make really good characters. But I had to research rats as much as I did have to research outer space. So Mortimer sets out to prove that rats belong there in space, and he's very modern. He has a YouTube channel. He takes video evidence to prove his points, but in the end, he has to make some hard decisions. So that's Mortimer, Rat Race to Space. Maybe I'll just show you. These are my new books, and I mentioned Make Your Mark, Make a Difference has that chapter on space. I don't have that book with me tonight, but it is available in New Zealand. So does anyone have any questions for me about my books or the topics that I shared with you tonight?
Have you collected any stories around New Zealand that might feature in future books?
I would love to. I have heard some stories, yes, about the night sky and different things, and I would love to do a Southern Hemisphere book, but I think it will be hard for me to get that published in North America where my connections are. So it used to be that I could retell stories from various cultures, and that was okay, but the climate has changed for that. And so if I was to write stories that reflected different cultures now, I would have to partner with someone from that culture. And so it's a little trickier than it used to be. Even though I do it respectfully, and I research and I collect from multiple primary sources, editors are very nervous about publishing these books now, which is unfortunate, because when I have presented my stories that I've collected, not really my stories, but the stories I've collected to those cultures, they have always been very appreciative and grateful that there's now something solid for them to use as a tool in their outreach or in their own communities even. Was there something?
Yeah, it's in a similar vein. The first peoples of North America, do they have a written language, or are they oral language like indigenous?
Some of them did have, they developed a written language. I'm not sure at what point in time, but it's like syllabics, I believe it's called. Okay. Yeah, so there's like symbols that are different. It's not our alphabet. They're like not.
In Central America, they had writing. The Spanish found lots of, actually destroyed a lot of their stuff apparently. Oh,
yes, it's very unfortunate. Because these stories collect us. They connect us to people that we can't otherwise know. They connect us to people from long ago, and they connect us across cultures. Like just when you travel within your hemisphere and you see the same night sky as people in other parts of the world, and you share these stories, it's just a very interesting connection.
So all the stories you collected have been told to you.
I found written versions of them. They probably were not written by the people whose story it was. They would have been written by explorers or by maybe missionaries and just different people. But I always found multiple sources before I would retell a story. Yeah.
The planetarium here do some local stories, like there's the common one is Maramas with the moon. Has everyone seen that? Yeah. That's quite an interesting one.
Yes.
How the shapes on the moon is, I think it's Marama and a tree or something that people see in the shapes on the moon. I remember reading about moths, how moths circle
yes.
lights and so on. It was thought for a long time they were attracted to the light, but it's actually not the case. They're actually trying to use the light for navigation. They're wanting to fly in a straight line, and at night they use things like the moon. And of course the moon's position doesn't change as they fly, so they fly straight, but if they try to use artificial light for that, because they're close to it, they just end up.
That's right. Yes, that's right. I actually talk about that in there, and then some of those, the lights are also, like it's a vacuum cleaner effect, it's bringing all the insects over here, and so bats or other species that are now looking for those insects are not finding them, so there becomes sort of a favoritism in some bat species are attracted to light and they're finding those insects and they're having an easy time, but other bats who are repelled by light, they're like, where are the insects? So it's, yeah, and some bats won't cross a border of lights. So you might have a park and you think, well, here's some habitat. Even if the lights are shining down, those bats don't want to cross that border of light, certain species, and so they won't use their commuter routes that they've used for eons, you know, because they're really creatures of habit. They really like to go the same routes all the time.
Any more questions?
Yep.
Why do you think some stories persist and others are lost?
I think a really good story persists. I think many of the stories are, even if it's about gods and goddesses, they have human characteristics. They make mistakes, they fail, they suffer. They do things that are really interesting to us because we make mistakes and we fail and we suffer. So when those are the kind of stories with a really strong human element that persist over time. And then I think the why stories, the ones that explain something, that they're very clever and we're charmed by them, they survive. I think that's the main reasons. Yeah. And then, I mean, also it just depends on there being storytellers to tell the stories. Yeah.
Well, thanks very
Right.
much.
Thank you.
For coming out to tell us about them. I believe the books are available for sale.
Yep, I just have a dozen books left. I have one Aurora and one Stories of the Zodiac, which is an astronomy book, not an astrology book, by the way, and one Dark Matters, and then I have about 4 Mortimers. So, yes, thank you. Thanks very much.
Tea, coffee down in the reading room, and hopefully if the sky's still clear, I can the lights up earlier, so